When she stays silent, at first it feels like something noble, something strong. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the deepest sign of control. It can stop a heated argument before it starts. It can protect dignity when anger tempts someone to say words they cannot take back. And it can create space for thought instead of reaction. In those moments, silence feels like wisdom. It feels like power. It feels like a choice that protects both her and the bond she values. But as the days turn into weeks and that silence remains unbroken, the meaning begins to change. What started as a moment of restraint turns into a habit of withholding. The silence stops being a choice of wisdom and slowly becomes a cage that traps her emotions. Each unspoken feeling begins to pile up, not disappearing but pressing down harder with every day she refuses to release them. And what once looked like strength now looks like distance, and what once seemed like peace now feels like a wall. From the perspective of Stoicism, silence is often seen as a virtue. The Stoic masters taught that words should be chosen carefully, that emotions should not dictate every response, and that patience often says more than an uncontrolled reaction ever could. But Stoicism was never about burying the voice completely. It was about mastery, not suppression. A Stoic learns to hold their tongue when anger tries to control them, but they also learn to speak when truth needs to be spoken. The problem is when silence is mistaken for stoicism, when a woman convinces herself that saying nothing is strength, when in reality it is only avoidance. Stoicism invites calm reflection, but silence without intention only creates confusion. True silence in Stoicism is purposeful. It allows the heart to breathe, the mind to clear, and the words to come out in their most meaningful form. But when she stays silent for too long, she loses that purpose, and her quiet becomes less about wisdom and more about hiding what she can no longer carry. Often the reason she chooses silence is not because she has nothing to say, but because she wants to keep the peace. She thinks that if she holds her words inside, she can prevent conflict, she can avoid the heavy arguments, she can protect the relationship from unnecessary wounds. At first, this seems like an act of care, even sacrifice. She convinces herself that by swallowing her emotions, she is keeping the bond intact. But peace built on silence is never real peace. It is only a temporary pause before a greater storm. The feelings she hides begin to shape her from the inside, turning into self-denial. She ignores her own needs just to maintain harmony, but in the process, she loses her voice. She stops being true to herself just to keep others comfortable. That silence, instead of being a shield, becomes a burden she carries alone. And the longer she holds it, the heavier it grows. The greatest danger in this is not only her own suffering, but also the miscommunication it creates with others. Because silence is rarely heard the way it was intended, to her it may feel like care, like patience, like restraint. But to the one on the other side it feels like distance. He may think she has grown cold, that she no longer has interest, or that she has emotionally checked out. Where she thought she was holding back to protect the bond, he thinks the bond has already weakened. Silence leaves a space, and in that space assumptions grow, and those assumptions are rarely kind. He fills the quiet with his own fears, his own doubts, his own story of why she is no longer speaking. This is how silence, meant to preserve love, slowly erodes it instead. It creates gaps where there should have been bridges. It creates distance where there should have been closeness, and it replaces understanding with confusion. Unspoken feelings never truly vanish. They sit quietly inside, pressing harder with every passing day. Like a river trapped behind a dam, The pressure only increases the longer it is contained. For a time, she convinces herself she can manage it, that she can hold it all inside and still keep moving forward. But emotions do not disappear just because they are ignored. They gather strength in silence until one day they spill over in a flood. And when that flood comes, it rarely comes gently. It pours out in tears, in anger, in overwhelming waves that shock both her and those around her. That is the inevitable result of silence kept for too long. It does not dissolve the feelings, it only delays their release, and when they finally break free, they come with a force that is far greater than if they had been spoken in time. That is why silence, though powerful in moments, becomes destructive when stretched too far. And so, silence must be respected, but it must also be balanced, because while it can protect for a while, it can also destroy when it becomes endless. True wisdom is not in holding back forever, but in knowing when to speak, when to release, and when to share the truth that has been held inside for too long. Balance is the key, but balance is also the hardest thing to achieve when silence becomes a habit. Stoicism at its heart does not tell us to bury every word. It teaches us to choose our words wisely, to measure them with reason rather than emotion, to let calmness guide what we express. The silence of a Stoic is not emptiness, it is preparation. It is the space where reflection takes place, where truth finds shape before it leaves the lips. But when silence is practiced without balance, when it stretches into days and weeks without a voice, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes avoidance, it becomes fear, and it becomes distance. Silence without balance is not wisdom. It is self-isolation dressed as strength. The beauty of Stoicism is in its harmony between restraint and expression. And when one side is ignored, the entire philosophy loses its purpose. Men often fail to understand this balance in her. When she is silent, they rarely see the inner battle, the hidden reasoning, the quiet strength she is trying to hold. Instead, they misread it. They assume her silence means agreement, as if she has no objections, no feelings of her own. Others take it as indifference, as if she no longer cares enough to engage, and some go even further, believing it is rejection, a cold wall that shows she has already turned away. In truth, her silence rarely means any of those things. More often than not, it means she is holding back pain, she is protecting peace, she is swallowing her voice to avoid hurting someone she loves. But because silence leaves space for interpretation, men fill it with their own fears and stories, and those stories are rarely aligned with her truth. This is how silence begins to create not just distance, but distortion, where what she feels and what he perceives are completely different realities. Over time, this distortion becomes dangerous. Silence starts to look like strength on the outside, like a sign that she is calm, untouchable, in control. But inside, it is not always strength. Many times it is detachment. It is her way of stepping back, of protecting herself from disappointment, of building a wall so high that no one can reach her. And that wall might look like resilience, but it is actually a quiet surrender. True inner strength is not the absence of expression, it is the ability to express with calmness, with clarity, with grace. Real resilience does not mean refusing to speak. It means speaking without being consumed by emotion. But when silence is mistaken for strength, it leads her further and further into emotional detachment. And once detachment sets in, connection begins to fade, not with loud arguments or explosive fights, but with the quiet disappearance of closeness. This is why the cycle of quiet suffering must be broken. No matter how much she convinces herself that silence protects her, deep down she knows it is also isolating her. Breaking the cycle does not mean losing control. It does not mean shouting, and it does not mean flooding every space with words. It simply means choosing to speak honestly, to share without fear, to let truth replace assumption. Stoicism, in its truest sense, calls for this. It calls for restraint in anger, but it also calls for courage in honesty. To live silently forever is not to live stoically. It is to live in avoidance. And avoidance may keep her safe for a while, but it will never allow her to grow, to heal, or to build the deep connections she desires. In the end, silence has its place, but so does speech. The wisdom lies in knowing when one should end and the other should begin. Silence can protect for a moment, but words are what heal for a lifetime. If she stays silent too long, she risks losing herself, her connection, and the love she tried so hard to preserve. True Stoic wisdom is not in endless quiet, but in measured expression, in the courage to break silence with calm truth. Because sometimes the bravest thing she can do is not to hold back, but to finally speak up.